Hi, I'm Frank Willem, host for today's episode of Gulf South Outdoors. We've had a lot of great trips aboard Vixen, but my favorites are always fishing far offshore. On this trip, we fished a deepwater drill ship and then a nearby rig called Blind Faith.
Reel up, reel up. Oop, you lost your bait. It's one of those, which of these is not alike?
We stopped along the way to jig for some live bait, and while we found plenty of bait, there was one problem.
Oop, you lost your bait.
A hungry barracuda.
Get a free meal. We're throwing out the sabiki rigs here. And he's been trying every way he can to get a free meal. What, Todd?
Finally, we had enough of our hungry barracuda, so having used up most of our sabiki rigs, and with a live well full of bait, we headed for the drill ship to do some serious fishing. While it's not uncommon fishing 100 miles or more offshore to see whales, it's always exciting. Many times when talking about such sightings, people ask me what type of whale we saw. I always reply, a big one. I'm not all that good with identifying them, especially since most of the time they're at a distance and we can only see the spray from their blowhole and maybe part of their back. But this time, we managed to get up close and saw what appeared to be a pair of sperm whales with a calf. What an incredible sight.
There's another one over there. What is all that? Did you get that right?
We arrived at the rig and immediately got our lines out to start fishing. Before long, we had our first tuna hooked up.
Good job, good job.
We caught a few more tuna, but the thing we wanted most is something with a bill attached. But no sign of that the first day. We arose the next morning to water that was green, but the tuna bite was still on big time. So we went to work and quickly had a couple in the boat. We hated losing such a nice fish, but the fish don't always cooperate. After boating a couple more nice tuna, we were back to trolling when we spotted a blue marlin. Since it was on the surface, we could see both its tail and dorsal fin and realized it was a big blue. When fishing for live bait earlier, we had caught a large hardtail so big it could hardly turn around in the live well. So Stephen retrieved it and rigged it for bait.
What's going on, Steven?
Apparently Eric just saw a big blue marlin up here swimming around the drill ship. So we're going to try to get a live bait rigged up and get in front of him. We're going to bridle this a hardtail. Just take a piece of wax line, a rigging needle, a 20-aught circle hook, and run it through the eye sockets, trying not to hit the brain. Come through. You're going to re-grab your floss. Give it a bunch of twists. And then you're going to come back through your knot here. That way the circle hook's freestanding and you have a better chance of getting a hook up with just a freestanding circle hook. Now we're ready to go.
you think a blue marlin's going to bite that, Steven?
Eric's on him. We'll see if Eric's lying.
What's your opinion of that, Todd? Do you think this is wishful thinking?
It can be done. It can be done.
What's your 2 cents, Dale?
They have killed the fish. But he's going to do good.
Seeing is one thing. Seeing is one thing. Catching is another. We'll see.
Well, you just heard the opinions of our crew. And I'll confess, I figured by the time we got the bait rigged, circled back, and started live bait fishing, the odds of catching that marlin were slim to none. I was wrong.
I mean, he'll come up, but
We began to pay out line, and after what seemed like only a couple of minutes, the marlin struck and we were on.
hey, call it in the head and tail. Call it in the head.
The last time I got into a battle like this, I'd spotted a mammoth-sized marlin swimming right behind the boat, all lit up. It looked like a large submarine. After unsuccessfully trying to eat every bait in our spread, she finally hit the center rigger, and we were hooked up. With line peeling off the reel at an alarming rate, I grabbed the rod and scrambled for the fighting chair. The fish went nuts, jumped, and then began greyhounding away from the boat. With the fish about to spool us, we yelled for Captain Eric Gill to back down. But no sooner did he gun the big diesels in reverse than the fish did an about-face and headed right back towards us. We began yelling for him to go forward while I reeled frantically to maintain tension on the line. I know Eric was wishing we'd make up our minds as he jammed the throttles back into forward and Vixen leapt ahead before slacking the line could cause us to lose the fish. After a few rounds of this, the fish settled down into a serious fight. I maintained pressure on the fish, thankful for the bucket harness, which hooked to the reel to take the load off my arms. The seas were flat with not a breath of wind, and I sat baking in the near triple-digit heat. I pictured the huge marlin in the cool depths below, queen of the ocean, and I knew that her initial rage at the relentless pull of the hook in her mouth had given way to confusion. By now, the confusion was bound to be given way to fear and despair as she grew tired. But after an hour and a half, my back ached from the constant 16 pounds of tension on the line, and my arms were numb. My initial exhilaration was turning to desperation as I asked myself, how long can she keep up this fight? How long can I? No longer was I quite so sure I could win. Then things went from bad to worse as the marlin headed straight down. Unable to stop her from sounding without risk of breaking the 50-pound line, there was little I could do except hold the rod as she steadily took line. Getting a fish that weighs nearly 700 pounds off the bottom in 700 feet of water with 80 or even 130-pound tests without breaking it off is difficult. Doing it with 50-pound tests is nearly impossible. I continued to fight this fish, hoping that it wouldn't be another 3-hour fight that ended like that last one. Continuing with the story about the big marlin that died, after she reached the bottom, we tried everything we could think of to get her back up. We just about exhausted our bag of tricks when, in a last-ditch effort, with the drag set to maximum, I placed my thumbs on the spool and held tight. Captain Eric maneuvered the boat, searching desperately for the right angle, until at last I was able to gain 2 feet of line. That was the good news. The bad news was I had 698 feet left to go. An hour and a half later, 3 hours after the fight had begun, she finally popped to the surface. What an awesome sight. She measured nearly 10 feet long from her lower jaw to the fork of her tail, 13 feet overall in length, and nearly 7 feet in girth. As I rose from the fighting chair on trembling legs for the first time in over 3 hours, I was filled with a mixture of emotions. Bone-tired and aching all over, I was thrilled to have caught the fish and was awestruck at the outstanding team effort of all involved. But the glow of the moment was also tinged with sadness at the sight of the huge dead fish. While our intention had been to release her alive, that was not to be. In catch and release bill fishing, which is all we do, once the swivel touches the end of the rod or the mate touches the leader, it's a caught fish. At that point, many times the line is simply cut as close to the hook as possible, after which it quickly corrodes away in the salt water. Sometimes the crew will attempt to retrieve the hook, but in many cases they opt out. With regard to safety, those bills can do a lot of damage, are putting undue stress on the fish. But the fish I was now fighting wasn't tail wrapped, and after a 40-minute fight, we got her to the boat. I can't describe the feeling of sitting in the fighting chair, fighting a big fish like this. It's just one of those things you've got to experience to understand. But I can say it's heart-stopping, adrenaline-filled, outdoor excitement. I fought the fish for probably 20 or 30 minutes before finally getting into the boat. Stephen touched the leader and it was a caught fish. But then the fish had other things on its mind and ran again. After another few minutes of fight, the fish pulled the hooks and was set free. But since releasing it was our eventual goal anyhow, no problem.
What do you think about it, Frank?
I think catching blue marlin is as good as it gets. Nice fight, big fish, great crew.
After our hearts had stopped pounding, we got back to fishing. We then moved to a nearby rig, and after only another hour, lightning struck again. We were fishing near the deep water rig Blind Faith when we had another hit on the right rigger. In moments, Keith Williams was in the chair with his very first billfish. But there was a small problem.
What's got on there, Keith?
I think I got a good one. It's a marlin.
One more time. What do you got on there, Keith?
I think it's a good one. It's a Marlin. We're going to find out.
I don't know what I'm gonna do with an 80-pound leader.
Have your way with him.
Keith was right. As he was getting settled in the chair, we looked behind the boat and saw a nice blue marlin greyhounding across our stern.
We thought we had a small tuna on. We looked out behind the boat, and there was a big blue marlin greyhound in the back across our stern here. We got some tuna rigs, little rig with a little 80-pound leader on it. This could be interesting.
So while we did have another marlin hooked up, the light leader increased the odds that we weren't getting it to the boat.
He's staying up high.
If he stays up high, you get close enough to that leader, I'm touching.
Yeah, all you gotta do is touch that leader. We're done. You got the rigger cams on? He's right there. Fish is right under the water. You see the shadow of it. Put him in low, Steven. No, he's taking line.
Aboard Vixen, we always have a captain, a mate, an angler, and a heckler, the job I enjoy most.
If you'd have been able to control your fish, he'd have been caught. He was right there, Keith.
But then Keith fought the fish back to the boat, and we could see it in the waves a short ways back. It was a bigger fish than we had first thought, probably 400 to 450 pounds. Steven stood ready.
Caught fish, all right.
We held our breath, and then the fish was there. One thing I can say about Steven is that he's fearless. I don't care how big the fish is or how green it is when we get it to the boat. He's always ready. While we've lost plenty of fish to broken lines or pulled hooks, we've never lost a fish to cockpit error, thanks to Steven.
Right. Get over here. Hey, is that? Woo, that's my first one. Is that your first
That's my
billfish?
first one. It was beautiful. Unbelievable. Great job of everybody working it. Unbelievable. The drilling hadn't stopped yet. Unbelievable.
Well, you realize you got two choices. You take your swim out here or in the harbor.
I may take both.
What do you think about that, Steven?
That's incredible.
What a trip! With a box full of tuna and after releasing a half ton of billfish, we headed home.